a collection of his poetry and prose. Let's make Rifat's book into what it deserves to be, an international bestseller. By purchasing it for yourself or beloved one, you could contribute to keep Rifat Al-Arir's legacy alive through his words. So the poem I'm going to read is called I Am You. 2 steps. 1, 2. Look in the mirror. The horror. The horror. The butt of your M16 on my cheekbone. The yellow patch it left. The bullet-shaped scar expanding like a swastika. Snaking across my face, the heartache flowing. Out of my eyes dripping, out of my nostrils piercing, my ears flooding the place like it did to you 70 years ago or so. I am just you. I am your past hunting, your present and your future. I strive like you did. I fight like you did. I resist like you resisted. And for a moment, I take your tenacity as a model. Were you not holding the barrel of the gun between my bleeding eyes? 1, 2, the very same gun, the very same bullet that had killed your mom and had killed your dad is being used against me by you. Mark this bullet and mark in your gun. If you sniff it, it has your and my blood. It has my present and your past. It has my present, it has your future. That's why we are twins. Same life track, same weapon, same suffering, same facial expressions drawn on the face of the killer. Same everything except that in your case, the victim has evolved backward into a victimizer. I tell you, I am you, except that I am not the you of the now. I do not hate you. I want to help you stop hating and killing me. I tell you, the noise of your machine gun renders you deaf. The smell of the powder beats that of my blood. The sparks disfigure my facial expressions. Would you stop shooting for a moment, would you? All you have to do is close your eyes. Close your eyes. Seeing these days blinds our hearts. Close your eyes tightly so that you can see in your mind's eye. Then look into the mirror. 1, 2, I am you, and killing me is killing you.
Hi everyone. I'm going to stand up because I'm really nervous. I had no idea how many people were going to be here tonight. I want to let you know that we are recording, but we're going to we're going to be blurring faces and trying to keep it centered on the speakers here. I also want to say again that this is a fundraiser, so please buy food and buy drinks at the bar, or there's also a donation box at the bar. Thank you so much for Casino for hosting. Obviously, we're in a difficult situation today with having people outside, unfortunately. But we're live streaming. I think have we managed to live stream? Can't see Sarah's face. Anyway, we're trying to live stream. So hopefully that's working out. I am so honored to be here. I'm a little bit overwhelmed to be here, to be honest. I hope if anyone's coming to the other events, they will be seeing worthy interlocutors with Mohamed here. I am here just to see hands up in the room and facilitate a discussion in the room as Mohamed speaks. So that is my role for the evening. I want to say thank you to Pass On Press, a collective of friends who are interested in building decolonial cross-movement solidarities. Pass On Press initiated this today, and they have done incredible work. So thank you so much for making this happen. And there is a limited number of Mohamed's books. This is already out of date. I hear they're already sold out. Islam and Anarchism, Relationships and Resonances from Pluto Press, and the sale of his shorter articles now, as well as 2 of the shorter articles now published by Pass On Press in English and Arabic. So there's also Collective Biblioteca and the Plaquette Archive. They have a table here, and you can sign up for their library card and info about the Anarchist Library. All right, now to Mohamed. I'm going to make this as quick as I can because I'm reading this. There's lots to say about Mohamed Abdou, but I'm going to start with the official text that was decided on because my words are, I'm too nervous. So Mohamed Abdou is an interdisciplinary scholar of Indigenous, Black, critical race and Islamic studies, as well as an anti-racist, feminist, gender, sexuality, women, decolonial and post-colonial studies, with extensive fieldwork experience in the Middle East, North Africa and Turtle Island. He is a self-identifying Muslim anarchist and diasporic settler of colour based in Toronto, of so-called Canada. Thank you very much for being here tonight. I was struck by something Mohamed said in an interview, which was a quote from the Zapatistas, I believe, which is, we were all here holding hands, asking each other, what do we know? So please, Mohamed's going to speak, but as he speaks, if you want to take part in the discussion, will you raise your hand and look at me? And I'm going to keep track of the questions and try to facilitate some sort of discussion happening. We will break in two parts for discussions in the middle and questions in the middle and questions at the end. So yes, without talking any longer, Mohamed Abdou. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So I'm going to stand, or try to stand. I'm really at a loss for words, for a lot of different reasons. Many reasons, actually. I'm deeply touched, beyond words. But let me roll back the clock a little bit. Assalamu alaikum wa shalom alakhim to our Jewish siblings in the room. I usually start all my talks by a dua, or a prayer from the Quran. And it's the prayer of Musa alayhi salam when they met Pharaoh. And the dua goes something like this. I'm going to read it first, or recite it first in Arabic, and then after that I'll translate it in English. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم اشرح لي صدري means, O Creator, open thy breast. ويسر لي أمري, and make my affairs easy. Make my affairs easy. واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي, and undo the knot of my tongue such that what it is that I have to share with all of you, and the very kind and generous crowd that is outside as well, becomes accessible to all of you and reaches your hearts, your ears, your souls. That is the point. I'm somebody who tries to do everything with their heart. I always say my heart is the twin engine behind anything that I have to say and share. The intellect is always there, but it's the heart that matters the most. That's what makes a difference in this day and age, which words have been rendered meaningless. It's a very Orwellian moment, if you will. Words and language, the means, have been devoid of substance. But I'd like to also take a moment to acknowledge Pass-On Press. Amanda, Katya, Hazem, and just the incredible, and Sarah, of course, the incredible collective, and their labor and efforts, of course, Casino, all of you. I would not be here without any of you. As I was saying outside, we're not individuals, we are networks of relations of power. So I'm going to say that again. We are not individuals, we're networks of relations of power. And we're supposed to embody something referred to as community, a very abstract term nowadays. Again, emptied, watered down. In a day and age in which words like collateral damage are being used to refer to civilian casualties, extraordinary renditions for CIA kidnappings, and many others, war on terror, defensive war. What the hell is a defensive war? preemptive war. There's a lot to say. But let me start off maybe, and I had something written down, but it's really useless. I would rather us have a conversation, so I'll talk for a few minutes and then we'll see. I'd rather learn from all of you. I'll learn what's on your mind. And for us to engage in the relational exchange of learning from one another. You see, there's a difference between nouns and verbs. When we say somebody is going to teach us, that means we're submitting ourselves to somebody to teach us, as opposed to learning, which is a verb. That means we're all learning from one another. I'm really tired of the concept and the vision of resistance. I'm not interested in resistance anymore. Resistance is a reactionary mode by which we are acting in the form of survival. I'm interested in the question of liberation. Liberation, which means being active. And to me, and in my world, that means that there is a difference between anti-colonial resistance, which is a legitimate right, enshrined by international law, which is absolutely meaningless. I mean, if after 16 months of a genocide, an ongoing genocide, by which, by the way, we are scrolling, doomsday scrolling, on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, all the social media that exists out there, on these phones, on mobiles, that are made from another genocide of copper and cobalt in the Congo, whose lives are worthy. Genocide in Sudan, the genocide in Kashmir, insofar as the ethnic cleansing that is happening with the Uyghur, with the Rohingya, insofar as Myanmar. But then what is the question of liberation concerned with? Well, for me, that involves the transformation of oneself as well as one's community. You see, revolutions are about practical questions, having lived Tahrir. What are you going to do with the army? What are you going to do with the police? What are you going to do when a single mother needs to feed her 3 children? Practical questions. Water, food, living. And that's not easy, because that involves transforming the way that we eat, the way that we breathe, the way that we think of intimacy. Love. But love is not this abstract concept, because love is also laden with power. Power. And to me, and in my world, and the reason that I wrote this book, the framing of 1492 becomes absolutely monumental because it helps to shed light. I don't give a damn about the 1948 and a 1918 narrative, to be quite frankly. I'm not going to subscribe to British contrived borders as a consequence of Sykes-Picot. I don't buy into that. Not a one-state solution, not a two-state solution. That was never even a possibility. 1492. 2 things happened in the world in 1492. Muslims and Jews were subjected to crusade insofar as at the behest of Ferdinand and Isabel, vis-a-vis a Christianity and Eastern tradition that was usurped underneath Constantine and weaponized as an imperial tool of conquest. Muslims and Jews were murdered, we were persecuted, raped, pillaged, forcibly converted. 800 years Muslims were in Andalus. Do you see it as a Muslim nation? No. I'm not out to romanticize the 1,445 years of Muslim history. We lost our way since the moment that the Prophet ﷺ died. But that becomes the point. We fed into our own arrogance. We reneged on our abolitionist trajectory and many, many other things. But that is what happens when any tradition, when any people buy into their own ego, subscribe to the world of the above, as the Zapatistas refer to it, as opposed to the world of the below, the downtrodden. This world, the horizontal world, in which power is fluid. You don't like what I say, you can scream, you can walk out, you can just tune out. This is where power is fluid. The state manifests power in a hierarchical form. It crystallizes power, such that the orders that come from above are followed by those that are below. And we relinquish that power, although we also exchange in that engagement of power every single day. And I can digress in 1,000 different ways, because we could sit down and think about the concept of violence and who has monopoly over violence. Well, what about the racism, the sexism, the queerophobia that we reproduce, the Islamophobia, the anti-spirituality within our leftist movement that we reproduce every single day? So the world of the below is what matters. But then what happens with Ferdinand and Isabel? Well, they're out and sent Columbus, who was a crusader, to gather riches in India specifically, although he lost his way and found his way to the Caribbean, of course, the discovery of the Americas. in order to raise enough wealth to engage in the reconquista, the retaking over of Jerusalem, Al-Quds. Okay. When one reads Columbus's diaries, what does he say? How does he describe the Taino people? He describes them as Muslims and Jews were described. Savages and heathens. Savage being the racial adjective used to describe us, our people. Heathen being the religious. Make no mistake about it, this is a racial and religious war. And I'm going to insist on this point. It's a religious war, whether we like it or not. And I'll explain why. He refers to the Taino people as savages and heathens. Hernan Cortez, the 15th century conquistador, what does he describe the Aztecs? He described Aztec women as Moorish women. Aztec temples as Moorish mosques. Even two-spirit people were described as Birdach. Birdach was originally cast on gender non-conforming Muslims. He described Montezuma, the Aztec leader, as a sultan. The new world is built in the image of the old. It's just the facade of secular, liberal enlightenment. When I find secularism to be the very bosom, it and liberalism, of white supremacy. I don't care if somebody comes and walks across the street and calls me a San Negro. At least I know where they stand in relationship to me. But the liberal is what I fear most. The Uncle Tom Obama, blackface, white masked, the Kamala Harris, and so on and so forth. That is the danger, and make no mistake, for me, whiteness is not a phenotype. It's not a skin color. It's about cultures of whiteness that even black, indigenous, and people of color have internalized. And what the hell is BIPOC? These acronyms, LGBTIQ. As if sex and sexuality, let alone race, can be conditioned and boxed in as is. But let me go back to that point. So this is Hernan Cortez. And then, after the extermination and ongoing genocide, and I'm going to insist on this point of indigenous people on Turtle Island, because there's still an ongoing genocide there. What did the Crusaders do? Engage in the project of enslavement. A third to a fifth of the transatlantic Middle Passage slaves were Muslims from the Iberian Peninsula and the west coast of Africa. And you want to tell me this is not a religious war? It's not a war, though, between Muslims and Jews. It's a war that Muslims and Jews have been conscripted into, again, vis-a-vis white supremacist interpretations of Christianity underneath Constantine, and that were projected onto Islam, onto Judaism in the manifestation of Zionism, and in the manifestation of Salafi as well as Muslim Brotherhood thought. And this is the nature of the battle that we're fighting at this moment. So we need to acknowledge, no, there is a religious component to this war, but not on the terms that white supremacy dictates. Right now, we're suffering, and I've written about this even before October 7th. Right now, and I've been warning about this for over 16 months. 16 months people are out on the streets, mobilizing. Do we all read Kwame Ture? The difference between mobilization and organization. Mobilization is about issues. Martin Luther King was a great mobilizer. Malcolm, the shining black prince, was a great organizer. Organizing is about structures. Turtle Island is a crusading settler colonial structure. What the hell is manifest destiny? Doctrines of discovery, terra nullius, Protestant conceptualizations of property, Victorian notions of gender and sexuality. And so we're caught in this reactionary mode, on the streets, mobilizing 16 months. And what do I see? I see conservative Muslims that are queerphobic and sexist and don't want to deal with critical race theory. I see queer communities not wanting to deal with the spiritual component that exists within their own lives. I see a left that is anti-religious, and I see anti-Zionist Jews, and everybody's yelling, free, free Palestine. And I ask everybody, what does a free Palestine mean? You see, it's the same logic as Tahrir, bread, freedom, and social justice. And I tried this during Tahrir. What do we mean by these terms? You ask the same group of people, Marxists, anarchists, and they'll give you different answers. And why I don't give a damn about ideologies, anarchists and Marxists. This is the problem with labels. You don't have black, indigenous people, you don't have black people of color. The problem with BIPOC. And look at the insidiousness of settler colonialism. Indigenous people on Turtle Island, at least certain communities, even certain families, were conscripted towards black extermination. And black people were conscripted towards indigenous people also engaged in black enslavement, as well as black people were conscripted towards indigenous extermination. Look at the fiasco of an oppression Olympics that we sit down and play with one another, the competition between struggles. I'm more of a victim than you. And this is why I continue to say, there is no freeing Palestine. We're all living this fantasy. Particularly Arabs, Muslim immigrant settlers, Palestinian diasporic settlers on Turtle Island, until we deal with the hypocrisy of the bigger monster in the mirror. The Zionist entity is built on a major blueprint, the big monster, but we don't want to deal with a 533-year-old genocide. We want to have our cake and eat it too. Well, listen, it can be both. It's either democracy, which it isn't, because it's a settler colonial society, a crusading settler colonial society, or it's an American nightmare, as Malcolm called it. Our shining black prince, Malcolm, that I took a great deal of inspiration, and there's no way that I would compare myself to somebody like Malcolm, but the beauty about this man, the magnanimity that he holds in our hearts, is because he engaged in an endless project of metamorphosis of self. The Malcolm before and after prison is not the same as the Malcolm before and after the nation, is not the same as Malcolm before and after his trip to Mecca. Okay, where's the continuation of Malcolm's project? What would Malcolm say about his friendship with a queer black man by the name of James Baldwin, insofar as queerness and Islam, gender and Islam? So to me, this book is about trying as much as I possibly can in relationship to 1492, in relationship to the complicities that I am very much entangled within as an Arab North African settler of color on Turtle Island. I don't shy away from that. To develop a Quran of the oppressed. What would Malcolm say now about Arab supremacy, about Sunni supremacy, about Shiite supremacy? This is why the left frays easily with regards to Syria. This is why black Palestinians explodes the moment Kamala comes on the scene. And not only black Palestinian Twitter or movement, no, black versus black Muslim. You see, race and religion, the constant entanglement. And you come and ask, well, what about religion? Now tell me, did Fanon not say decolonization is inherently a violent act? Did he not say that land is the true capital? But land is not a spiritual object. She is a subject. We rely on her. We're actually at the bottom of the food chain. She doesn't need us. Plants don't even need animals. We're at the very base of the pyramid. We need both. The earth, our land, our mother earth, from which we're severed from, our umbilical cord, is what provides the food that we eat, the very breath that we breathe. And yet look at our neglect of her. And we think that this is a struggle over power, over states, for a world of the above. We speak of the Muqama as if it's this monolithic group. Sorry to break it to you all if we don't even realize this at this point. No, it was never a group that was entangled together according to spiritual and ethical political commitments. Iran has different values than certainly the dictator and the butcher of Damascus, than certainly Hezbollah, than certainly Islamic Jihad, let alone Hamas. They are anchored in different values. Hamas is capitalist. Islamic Jihad is anti-capitalist. What does liberation mean? Beyond the superficial. This is why an axis falls just like that. And we're not reflecting on the project of organizing. But organizing requires this, the face-to-face, the getting to know, the eyes. If couples find it very difficult to even remain in a relationship, can you imagine what it takes to actually sustain community, to hold on to community? To me, there is no revolutionary movement without three things. And I've been a part of those things. But I don't see the majority being a part, and this is what I get. This is what we get from the Zapatistas and the Panthers. The Panthers built the breakfast programs. They had schools. They had clinics. And then they bore the right to bear arms. To defend. What are we defending? What have we built to defend? So to me, there has to be, number one, a narrative that links all our struggles together. Indigenous, black, people of color, etc., according to a 1492 framework. Number two, the creation of alternatives. What are we leaving for our children that Mumia Abu Jamal refers to? Or what come from immortality and are the arrows that we shoot towards infinity? That becomes the question. and then to be able to defend that. So it's not a matter of just bearing arms. There has to be creation, social centers, alternative ways of being, of becoming, of evolving. I don't give a damn if you show up and you tell me you're an anarchist or a Marxist or a Muslim or Jewish or whatever. You could be Muslim and Zionist, you could be anarchist and Islamophobic. To me, again, I could care less about identities. It's about the spiritual, political, ethical responsibilities that inform whatever sets of identities. Embrace your identities to let go of them. It's about the responsibility. That's where it becomes key in this project. The building for tomorrow. This is not about the politics of rights. None of us have rights until we understand what our responsibilities are to one another. The state operates vis-a-vis a politics of rights. Your rights, my rights, pinned against each other, and then the lowest common denominator that is necessary to get a party leader or a particular party elected into power. But look at the moment that we're living in. Mr. Musk, who tweeted at me as a traitor and many other things, doing an interview with the head of the AfD, whose grandfather was a Nazi, and trying to rewrite history. That Mr. Hitler was a communist, was a socialist. Where are we in the midst of all this? Oh, right. We're on social media tweeting. We're on Instagram scrolling. This is the crisis that we're living. Are we all scared? Hell yeah, we're scared. But we need to muster the courage, the audacity. If colonialism stole anything from us, it is our ability to dream dangerously. It is our ability to dream dangerously, wildly. This is the beauty of our youth. As one grows older, we become attached to the material realities of life. The apartment, the children, the school, the car. And what next? Oh, you just get ready to die. The children, the innocence, the courage, the audacity, the dreamlike worlds that they have, see through all this BS. We all have experiences with children, with youth, and they can tell when we're being fake. But we lose that courage. This was the power of the encampments with my students at Columbia. We created an alternative. Was it temporary? Yeah, it was temporary. We knew it was temporary. I knew it was temporary. Never going to get BTS out of Columbia University. Again, academia is a site of resistance. It's not a site of liberation. Real liberation happens on the land. On the land. So that becomes the challenge. How do we build on the land and build together, and whose land, and where, and how? How do we grow our movements? When Islamophobia or Islam has become this quintessential linchpin where everybody projects their animosity with regards to. Well, this is an attempt at the book insofar as what I'm trying to unravel insofar as the Quran of the oppressed. It's a challenge and it's hard because we've all internalized monstrosities. Fascism is a mass psychology, folks. William Reich had long written about it. The nation state teaches us how to be patriarchal, how to be authoritarian. Oh, you're not black, you must be indigenous. Oh, what type of trans are you? You're not FDM, so you must be MTF, and so on and so forth. Boxes. Do we all judge one another? Fuck yeah, we judge one another. And it's stupid to deny that we judge one another the moment that we walk into a room or anything like that. Let's acknowledge that judgment. But the problem is not the judgment. It's upon the ethical, political criteria upon which we judge somebody else. We've all become gods, demagogues, vying for God's displaced space and power. Oh, down with the regicide Mubarak. What? We don't have a mini Mubarak, a mini Trump, a mini Obama inside each and every single one of us? So let's fight the KKK, particularly white people, that exists inside all of us. Let's fight the monster. That's how you get the Daesh. That's how you get ISIS. Pure reactionary politics. Out of a trauma. And I'm not condoning Daesh, just to be very clear. But as somebody who sits down and studies, is involved in social movements, we need to understand. How does one become a monster? What? Hitler arose overnight? Osama bin Laden arose overnight? No! There's a making of monstrosity. Who doesn't want this, Mike? Who doesn't want a nice apartment? A nice car? Again, we're all playing survival. But this is what I'm saying. I'm tired of talking about surviving. I want to talk about thriving. Growing. That is what becomes key. The building of worlds, as the Zafat used to say. A world where all worlds belong. I'm sorry, You don't get to embrace anarchism overnight and play purity politics and say fuck religion. Go deal with this beautiful tradition called Christianity that is an Eastern tradition. I understand. You've been involved and exposed to Catholicism and Protestantism and hierarchical religions and the church and this and that. Don't cast that upon the tradition. But this is where we need to sit down and have a rigorous conversation. In Islam, there's a difference between religion, deen, as a concept, and faith, iman, and spirituality. Look at the nuances that are lost and how these are interrelated concepts at the same time. We need to do a lot of unlearning and relearning. And this is what becomes key. And the same goes to Muslims. When Islam is translated, even by Muslims, not only Orientalists, what is it translated into? And if I ask even Arabs, they will say the same thing. Submission. Actually, the word for submission is khudu', a completely different word. Islam comes from the word salama. Sin lam mim, to willfully deliver, to deliver upon choice. But this is what's removed in Orientalist gaze, in a white supremacist gaze. Why? Because it removes from the fact that Muslims are commanded in the Quran, in verses, to say or to think, أَلَا يَتَفَكَّرُونَ أَلَا يَعْلَمُونَ أَلَا يَفْقَهُونَ. Do they not think? Do they not reflect? The Quran is mostly 70% metaphor. Reflect upon how the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Reflect upon how the bird leaves its nest in the morning, not knowing where it's going to find its nourishment, let alone that for its children. Yet, it is bestowed. So I don't care what you call God, whether it's Mother Earth or Buddha or Yahweh or Adonai or Jesus or Allah. That means nothing to me. Islam acknowledges over 300,000 different prophets that were sent to different tribes and nations, as the Quran says, so that what? You may get to know one another. Do you know how many times the word Muslim is mentioned in the Quran? 6 or 7 times. Do you know what the emphasis is on in the Quran? It's on the term mu'min or believer. So I go through the Quran. What are the characteristics of the believer? The one who does not engage in riba and interest. The one who minds the rights of the poor, the orphan, women, children, elderly, the oppressed, the meek of the earth. The one who cares for the land. So we begin to develop a new constellation. So then there are Muslims that are actually not believers, though they embrace the label Muslim, but are misogynist and sexist and racist and so on and so forth, as in any other community. So to me, the element of belief then becomes core. And then we move on to anarchism. Anarchism is always mistranslated as anarchy, as chaos. In Arabic, as fawdawiyya. Is anarchy as chaos. But the actual term, as Hiba Rauf Izzat, a political scientist in Cairo University, had long noted, is la sultawiyya, without authority. Language is power, as Foucault had long noted. We need to reclaim what is ours, but that can only happen if we actually face truth. Again, the monster in the mirror. I'm tired of us pointing at a far away small monster. Let's deal with the monster in the mirror. Let's build community and build that community on the land. I'll stop there. God bless you all. I am eternally beyond grateful for this warmth, for this affection, for this grace, for you all listening and not just hearing me. And I'm deeply humbled and honored. This is my first time in Germany, let alone Berlin. So this means a lot to me, given the history of this country and given the present moment that we're now living. Thank you all very much.
I was thinking I was going to interrupt you at some stage and open it to the floor, and then there was no stage you could interrupt. So I would love to hear some questions for the room. I'm going to do my best from where I'm sitting to keep a track of hands. I've got one here. So yeah, are we trying to pass the mic back? I think it. Yeah, let's see if we can do it.
And please, there are no stupid questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Thank you.
So yeah, please feel free to ask.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we all heard very needed
words. I wanted to ask, because you made this difference between resistance and liberation, it really speaks to me.
Yeah.
And also about mobilization, organization. And I was wondering what do you see is missing right now in our ways of organizing? And how can spirituality, Islam, what it teaches us how can we infuse that in our ways of organizing? And yeah, what can we learn from it?
Thank you very much. That's God bless you. That's a great question. I can't really speak to organizing in Berlin because thank you. I can't really speak to organizing in Berlin because this isn't my scene. Although obviously I'm taking this opportunity and this becoming, God willing, of a community. And allow me to say that regardless of where I am at your service, in the service of our people. And I mean that sincerely, and you can put it to the test, and I'll do my utmost. So I can't speak necessarily to Berlin. I can speak in the context of Turtle Island. I can speak in the context of Egypt, in which millions of people went out. And what was the moniker? We overcame fear in 2011. Ha! Are you marching towards Gaza to break the siege on Rafah? Egypt is the second jailer of Gazans since Camp David in 78. Fear, fascism, totalitarianism. And totalitarianism is very different than fascism. The two intersect, but they're not one and the same. But generally, with regards to organizing, look, again, in the context of Egypt, anti-blackness is very fraught. My PhD was on Islam and queer Muslims. And I was honored to, again, stumble, because there's an element of divine intervention involved in that. Insofar as the majority of my community, they weren't just ethnographic participants or participant observers that I was, again, they became my community in so many different ways, although I don't identify as queer. Queer phobia is just sexism dressed in drag. Again, it has become an identity politic which is highly problematic. This is about gender more than anything else. But again, that's a whole different other discussion. But my point being is that what is the condition of Nubians? Right? Egyptian government utilizes Nubians as a way to essentially masquerade anti-blackness, the blackface that happens during Ramadan on TV, but more than that, to deny them the right of return. And Nubians have been displaced 4 times. Twice during the time of Nasser, a socialist president. Land. Who owns the land in this country? And again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't organize within the urban metropolis. There is such a thing as an urban zapatismo. But where are the social centers? Where are the workers' cooperatives? I mean, are people's horizons just unions? Why don't we look to Argentina in 2001? There's a movie called The Take on this, where workers took over the means of production insofar as the factory. They weren't seeking to just be unionized and acted as a collective. I helped found cooperatives. I helped, alhamdulillah, with the help of many others, of course, social centers. The cooperative no longer exists, the workers' cooperative, but it lasted for a good 20 years, something like that. What destroyed it, I could sit down and talk about that. The apoliticization of it, the hiring of friends as opposed to people who have political nuance, who want to work, who understand the relevance of politics. We serve free food to the homeless, bake free bread every single day, and so on and so forth. And this is the least that we can do, but it's a matter of popping up communities. As far as the social center that we built, it took 1 year. It still exists. But 1 year for the original founders to tear each other apart over what? How loud the music was. Who was doing and not doing the dishes or the cleaning or whatever. This is what I'm saying. Living together is not easy. If a couple struggle with it, can you imagine insofar as community? Land becomes very central. Fighting the monsters inside ourselves becomes central, but I can't fight the monster inside myself because that requires community. I need people to remind me at some point or another I'm going to make a sexist statement, unintentionally. So it's a matter of the community calling me in, not calling me out, and reminding me, we know that that's not you. So this becomes, again, the ethical, political, spiritual. Now, what can Islam teach us? Just to get to that point really quickly. We are all looking to Palestine, and we're all heard this term Samud. But again, what are we seeing insofar as an anti-religious left denying the fact that this is a religious war? That there is a spiritual dimension to this war. And of course, most leftist spaces are animated by white people. Right? It was Kwame Ture that said, you cannot be revolutionary without engaging with the question of religion. To people of color, religion and revolution go hand in hand. Religion and revolution go hand in hand. There's an element of modesty, of humility. A lot of people don't know this, and Muslims don't even reflect upon it. There are verses in the Quran that are referred to as the verses of Al-Ghayb. Al-Ghayb, that nobody knows the meaning of. Chapter 2, chapter of the cow. Okay, starts with Alif Lam Mim, 3 Arabic letters conjoined to very Roman Arabic word that nobody knows the meaning of. What is the wisdom in that? Well, yes, the Quran was sent in Arabic and to Arabs. It is not exclusive to Arabic, to Arabs, and most Muslims are not Arabs. But it was designed to humble Arabs as to your own language. As any other people, we are prone to, yes, hospitality, generosity, chivalry, and so on, but we're also prone to arrogance. There is no exclusivity. Look at, again, Myanmar, how it mobilizes Buddhism and conservative, militant, white supremacist ways to engage in an ethnic cleansing and a genocide of the Rohingya. So nobody has, again, a purity politics over the question of spirituality or religion, but we have to engage it that way. So to me, this is what really becomes key. We need to search inside ourselves. I'm tired of people engaging in this 9/11 ceremonial thing of, look how many Muslims are converting or non-Muslims are converting to Islam. Listen, the Prophet said it a long time ago. Near the end of time, there are over 73 interpretations of Islam. Only one will be the true one. You will be as many as the foam on the oceans of the sea when it crashes into the rock, but you will be as fickle and feeble as that foam. How many Muslims are there? 2 billion? What are we worth? Nothing. We have our lands. We have our language. We have our religions. We have. Resources. Everything. This is the so-called post-colonial moment. What post-colonial moment? What post-colonial moment? We never thought through alternative modes of governance. Yeah, we had the phase of the Bandung, the third world movements, and non-aligned, and socialism, and so on and so forth. Okay. And yet we conceive that the state could be is a neutral entity, let alone it could be an instrument of liberation. The master's schools will never dismantle the master's house. These are not our ways of governance, our ways of being. So I don't give a damn how many billions of Muslims convert. What are you converting to in the first place? Sorry, I'm going to say something relatively controversial, and I've said it before. Not that I'm void of controversy. October 7th. What does the Quran say? وَكَمْ مِنْ فِئَةٍ قَلِيلَةٍ غَلَبَتْ فِئَةٍ كَبِيرَةٍ. How much of a small group defeated a larger enemy? But more than that was said. وَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّنْ قُوَّةٍ. And prepare for them what is necessary in strength. The Quran also said. Don't go into a battle that you're not prepared for. Sun Tzu even said that. So it's not a question of numbers. The Zapatistas weren't large in numbers. The Panthers weren't large in numbers. Malcolm wasn't large in number. Look at the imprint that they have left. The mark that they have left on the world. It's a small group that are organized, that know, that have the conviction in what it is that they're doing. Life or death, but they build first for something to be left behind that they are actually protecting. So it's not a matter of numbers. The hell with numbers. Yet look at indigenous people. Decimated. Residential schools, everything. Their names are lost. Black people, a history marked with an X. Land stolen from them. There was a reason that it was 40 acres and a mule with Andrew Jackson, and then they rescinded the 40 acres because, oh my God, if black people had access to land, what would happen? So, again, I go back to the point, land, community, fighting the microfascisms inside us, interrogating the question of, again, going beyond identity. This is about spiritual, political, ethical commitments, above all. So I hope that offered some measure of...
Thank you.
Sorry, sometimes my responses will be long-winded, but hopefully...
It's great.
There are no short answers. I don't do 140 characters on Twitter. I really struggle with that. So.
This is what we're here for. So I've got one question here, and then I've got one question there, and then 3. And then I'm going to pick... Okay, 4. Okay, now I'm stopping picking until next time. So please...
I'll try and be brief, I promise, as much as I can.
So my question would be, is focusing on building communities or like liberation would be a form of escapism, or is it actually like not building communities is actually escapism? Like basically maybe in like the Arabic saying is like الإيمان الكبير والإيمان الصغير.
Again, a brilliant question. God bless you. It depends on who we're talking about. Then again, I'm tired of also words as the Muslim world. There is no Muslim world and there is no Arab world. And when I say that Islam becomes central, by the way, because this becomes important, it doesn't mean that Palestine belongs to Muslims, because that's a stupid thought. It's not. It's the way that even Palestinian Christians are subsumed within Islam, insofar as being terrorists, as being savages, as being heathens, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to touch on that point. But again, it depends on who we're talking about. If we're talking about the context of Palestine, that's very different than if we're talking about ISIS. But there are elements of reaction that certainly exists with Daesh that is far more palpable than it does in the context of Palestine, because it's a matter of entrenchment, insofar as the condition in relationship to a Zionist entity. In the case of a movement, because it is a movement whether we like it or not, and whether they're supported by Euro-Americans and Saudis and Wahhabis that have logistically, materially armed them, and so on and so forth, Daesh is also a frame of mind. We need to ask ourselves, and again, this becomes a question, what would make 14, 15, 16-year-old girls from the UK that have never lived in Muslim lands, or predominantly Muslim lands, leave their homes in the UK and go join ISIS? Well, when we all saw the dividing arbitrary line between Iraq and Syria fade, wither, it all spoke to an idea, I didn't talk about this idea, but it's certainly discussed in the book, of the Ummah, the global community of believers, not exclusively for Muslims. And for me, I situate it within the Medina Charter. There was such a thing that the Prophet ﷺ founded in Medina after Muslims were being persecuted in Mecca, forcibly converted, murdered by their own families, tortured, and exposed to even economic boycott. Muslims were left stranded in the desert with hot stones placed on their chest by their own families to recant from Islam. And then what would they do? They first migrated to Abyssinia under the protection of King Najis, who reverted to Islam on his deathbed, and then to Medina. Build community. But to go back so I don't lose that strand. Okay? If I was an Iraqi, if I was a Syrian, etc., and my land, my sister, my mother, everything was ripped apart by imperialism. And I didn't have a chance to study critical race theory or decolonization or abolition. It's psyche. So there's a spectrum of reactionary politics. And when you're oppressed and when you're slapped, and you don't have the understanding or the moment of self-reflexivity, you will respond back. Violence breeds violence. Wanton violence. So this becomes the question. We're constantly reproducing that violence, and that violence is reenacted from above, and we internalize it and reproduce it on one another. This is why I say is racism, sexism, etc., Islamophobia, not forms of violence. We reproduce it on the horizontal scale, on the ground. So it is a matter of both, and it is a matter of context. This is why the greater jihad becomes very important, the struggle against oneself, but also in relationship to community. The smaller jihad, the defensive jihad. Hopefully that answers your question.
Is that that's it?
Yeah.
Do you want to shout? Come on. Yeah. Great. Yeah, that's it.
Hello. Ah, there he's coming.
You did it. Oh, there's more. Great.
Yeah, I hope I can phrase my question properly. It's a bit of an historic question relating to Islam. So you've mentioned that the term mu'min is a more common term in the Quran, unlike the term Muslim. But like as Muslims in particular, when we ask questions about which historic institutions have defined what a Muslim is, when it was historically maybe in the early times a little bit more vague and undefined, and pretty much our institutions like the madahib, the schools of thought, different understanding of Islamic jurisprudence, they were built up by states, by also white supremacist states and imperialist states like the Umayyads and the other states, and what we to adopt like a Western term, like what we understand as Islamic orthodoxy, was shaped by these states. So, as Muslims, I would want to like do a take. How much do we have to also deconstruct what are the established institutions of our religion, and to have the power to define the religious terms, to reflect on how these institutions were formed in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you so much. A brilliant question. Again, God bless you. Brilliant questions, and obviously, that particular question I addressed in the book, but I didn't address it. There is no such thing as an Islamic state. It's a contradiction in term. The state is a modern European colonial way of organizing the world in hierarchical ways. There is no term for Islamic state, although Daesh used the term الدولة الإسلامية. But كلمة دولة, or the word dawla, doesn't mean state. It actually is duwayla, and it's mentioned in the Quran. We didn't have a word for state when Europeans in the 17th, 18th, 19th century imposed this mode of government. Hierarchical, top-down, a way of organizing vis-a-vis institutions. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't institutions, but they weren't the nature of the institutions that we understand now. And the word duwayla actually falls between two verbs, dar and zal, to rotate and to go away. So during this period, I would describe it, as empires, as different manifestations of the ummah in totalitarian ways, but they weren't states. Why do I go that way? Because still, even within the Umayyads, Abbasids, and any other era, the fact that they weren't state, that it wasn't a top-down, is actually what permitted Muslims to overthrow or to go against particular attempts at the political, theological crystallization of power in particular areas in the so-called Muslim Ummah, confederacy, that tended to be more decentralized, because often is the case that you had several duwaylas, centers of power, in the same and part of the same geography of a Muslim Ummah. And there weren't, again, styrated lines insofar as longitude, latitude, the way that the land was divided. So there was a capacity for migrating. You didn't like this territory, you could move to this territory, and so on. So again, there was an element of fluidity that was preserved that allowed Muslims at certain junctures, even scholars that we know, to challenge despotic rulers, to be beheaded, yes, as a consequence, but to be able to challenge. That doesn't exist in the world that we exist today, because Al-Azhar University, the scholars, and so on. Of course, everybody's trying to claim Islam. Al-Azhar is trying to usurp Islam. That's versus Muslim dictatorships that are trying to usurp Islam. The Emirates has its own understanding, and so on and so forth. So this is why I say that the moment with the death of the Prophet ﷺ may be okay with the Khulafa al-Rashidin, because they conducted themselves in a different way, though. And what was the consequence of the four rightly guided caliphs? The case is 3 of them were murdered. Okay, so this is what I mean. Keep power fluid. There was something else that I was going to say with regards to that. The concepts that I derive are not just in the book anti-authoritarian. Anti-authoritarianism, that's a slogan to me. What are the non-authoritarian concepts that exist within Islam that inform, again, this egalitarian way of organizing horizontally? Well, we can start with the concept of Tawheed. The Prophet ﷺ spent 10 years with this one concept. Muslims were still drinking. They were still doing all the stuff that they were previously doing. Because if you think about it, any prophet that comes, if you come and say, do this and don't do that, who's going to believe you? Who's going to follow you? Nobody will. But the Prophet came with Aqidat al-Tawheed. La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. There's only one God, and Muhammad is the last and final messenger. Why? Because that means if we believe in that concept, you don't worship a flag, you don't worship a nation, you don't worship a tribe, you don't worship blood, you don't worship race, you don't worship anything. Your loyalty is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then we find other micro, non-authoritarian concepts. Shura, there's a chapter called the chapter of Shura. Mutual consultation. Ijma', community consensus. Maslaha, public welfare. I mean, this is why I use particularly the Quran It's not that I ignore the oral tradition, the hadith, let alone the prophetic practices. But the Quran is the one caliber that I'm able to hold everybody from the nation of Islam, let alone the regime in Iran, let alone anybody else. Insofar as this one book. Let's sit down and talk. Or Dughan, you tell me that Islam is capitalist? Okay, let's have that conversation. So this is what becomes empowering in that particular text, just as much as the many chapters in the Quran that are named after non-human life. The chapter of the beast, Surah Al-Nahl, Surah Al-Ra'd, the chapter of the thunder, the chapter of the moon, the chapter of the sun. Yet do we sit down and reflect upon what is the wisdom that Allah would name chapters in the Quran after non-human life? A politics of responsibility. So going back to that point, there is much that has been written over the course insofar as the history of Islam over 1,445 years. And yes, we have Muslim Marxist interpretations, Ali Shariati, and many other folks. The question to me was always the question of nobody has ever actually went through conceptually in the Quran and developed this horizontalist understanding of Islam. The problem with even the term anarchist, and for the longest time I was known as the anarchist who won't identify as an anarchist. Well, what does that even mean when I call myself anarchist Muslim or Muslim anarchist? What comes before the other? Although I'm a set of conjunctive ants, I'm a Muslim, and I'm an anarchist, I'm a feminist, I'm an Arab, a North African, and so on. I'm not going to be a destructive or I'm not going to be this or that. But what if I inherently believe that Islam is inherently anarchistic? So what is the point of me adopting the label anarchism? But I do it tactically, maybe even strategically, to address different kinds of audiences. Insofar as the oxymoron of what that equation might mean to somebody who doesn't know Islam and somebody who doesn't know anarchism. So going back, there is no Islamic state. I do believe, again, sovereignty in Islam besides Allah manifests in the Ummah. And there are lessons to be drawn on from there, and this becomes then the subject of the book. This is also the delusion that Daesh and ISIS fell into, the Islamic State, although it was a proto-state and trying to do this and that. But this is sort of the facade imagery that we give Muslim labels because we neither to modern ways of being, and we neither understand our past nor the world that we live in. We don't understand what nation states are that distinguishes them from Muslim empires or former ways of being. And of course we have the concept of khulafa, we're all caretakers of the land, and so on and so forth, right? And that discussion of why the need for a single caliph, why the need for a single person. But like I said, the four rightly guided caliph, even in their ways of conduct, they haven't had internalized a revolutionary way of being in relationship to one another. So they conducted themselves naturally, organically. What Ali wasn't a part, let alone Ummahat al-Mu'mineen, the wives of the Prophet, and so on and so forth. We have many incidences in which a Khalifa was called out by women within the masjid. But this is the thing, again, power was fluid. Power was fluid. The moment that I say, I am the president, I am Elon Musk, I am Trump, and I could give many other examples, but people won't like the examples, right? So this is the problem with, again, because I heard it, Morales is the president of all indigenous people. I beg your pardon. This is the problem. Maduro, and so on and so forth. There are many examples. Castro, God bless his long oratory skills and so on, but is that the extent of the Cuban Revolution? And this is not to critique Cuba, but it's just to expose the limitations. The limitations. I'll say it a third time, the limitations of that statist arc. Do we not have ways as native indigenous people of organizing our societies differently? Or have we just accepted the de facto quo? Why is it that we so easily call, well, capitalism is a product of colonial modernity and what the hell is the state? Though they share short-term animosities, their strategic interests are one and the same. They go hand in hand. You wouldn't have capitalism without states and states without capitalism. So this is my problem with sort of even... Anyways, I'll stop there. People of color Marxism. Right? So, yeah, let's look to indigenous anarchism, black anarchism, and so on and so forth. So.
We've got another question down in this corner. I don't think we're getting the mic to you. Could you just talk quite loud?
Yeah,
if possible?
sure. I'm not sure how stupid or smart my question is. I will try, however. We were talking about hostility in the left scenes against religion and Islam, like Islam hostility, and my question, and I always noticed that there is the term Islamism, which is always being used as a pretext, so to speak, And my question is, how would you differentiate between Islam and Islamism? Because I feel there's much mixture where people just like whenever they try to criticize Islam, they say this, or people who have different opinions, then the first attention, oh, this is Islamist, which is like, to be away from Islam's hostility and Islam.
Thank you. Great question. God, I mean, I could say it over and over, but it's the truth. You know where the term Islamism comes from? It comes from Europe. You can trace it back, and I did, and others did, in British and French dictionaries and lexicons. And it was conjunctive with the term Mohammedanism. And what was the idea? That these Muslims are exceptional from us in two ways. Number one, white Europe perceived that Muhammad was to Islam the same way that Jesus was to Christianity, or to white Christianity. Number two, that these Muslims cannot separate their politics from their religion. But this is the thing, and this is what I demand. Where is Jesus that stood in defense of Mary Magdalene? Where is Jesus that flipped money in relationship to the exchange of interest in the temple? Where is Moses who stood against Pharaoh? Where is Muhammad that stood for the oppressed? Every faith. What, Marxism is not a religion? Anarchism is not a religion? Capitalism is not a religion? The nation state is not a religion? These are all religions. And they're political religions. We just pretend that they're not religions. So, again, it involves us understanding, and this is the thing with the term political Islam, and I hate it. It assumes that Islam is politicized as opposed to the fact that it's inherently political. Any idea is inherently political. There is no such thing as apolitical nihilism. If Nietzsche was an apolitical nihilist that they called him, he would have sat down and written about the patterns on butterfly wings, which still would have been an acknowledgement of a certain politics towards non-human life. So when he gets labeled as an apolitical nihilist, it's just like, what are you talking? And I've seen many Muslims, of course, in khutbahs and Friday prayers make this argument, right? So this whole opiate of the masses concept is highly problematic, right? And if we're going to be truthful with ourselves, this is what dogmatism, this is what ideological pandering ultimately leads to. But this is where I come and say, well, if that's the case, then we need to focus not only on conceptual tools vis-a-vis the Quran in relationship to Islam, but also to be able to ground that Islam in particular concepts that create life, that create alternatives. There are no Muslim Zapatistas. Well, I lived with them. And again, there's much to be said about that. So I think this becomes the trajectory that's very important. And again, I understand, given the terms, the lexicons, the Orientalism, and so on, that people can have certain misconceptions, but that's part of the unlearning that, white people or leftists or whatever need to do. And if they're not willing to do it, then you're not a part of my community. It's as simple as that. You either take up that responsibility the same way that, of course, we would expect a Muslim to deal with queerness. What, there are no same-sex practicing laws? What about the Nafzawi? What about the Razi? What about Rumi and the poetry? And so on. You had entire sex manuals within Arab and Muslim lore and discourse in the pre-modern period. But why not now? And if we're really serious about dealing with homo-nationalism and pinkwashing, we need to understand that the center and crux is not the fact that it's, Palestinians are queerphobic, or Arabs are queerphobic. If you actually study Maya Mikdashi, if you actually study Joseph Masad, if you study Just Rapport and so on, we've clearly defined the center of this is Islamophobia. Islamophobia. Not just to the racial dimension of it, that Palestinians are exceptionally queerphobic. No, it's about Muslims being exceptional. I'll never forget the 9/11. Being in the subways in New York. And what was the poster? By Pamela Geller and her crew of fascists, alongside with Bill Maher and so on and so forth. I mean, they're liberal, conservative, and so on and so forth. Forgive my phrasing, I don't mean to be crass, but it was Osama bin Laden with his anus being penetrated by the Empire State Building with the words "Empire Strikes Back." They understand the notion of shame very well. This is why we have Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, etc. Because we refuse to confront queerness. So they know our weak points. Why is it that Palestinians become traitors, particularly easily conscripted insofar as if they are queer Palestinians?
because the Zionist entity understands very well that this is an opportunity to evoke a certain shame. So they catch them in particular vulnerable positions, etc., etc. In a world where privacy no longer exists, and this is the problem with gay marriage and all that baggage and coming out cultures and so on. I'm not saying that people should be ashamed, but give me a break. You're supposed to out yourself and then after that you expect privacy? There's a problem. There's a problem. You're supposed to divulge the most intimate recesses of what it is that you do in bed, in public. Why? Are heterosexual people supposed to do that? But again, this is why coming out originally started as a white man's way of overcoming their own sense of shame. Now, I'm not saying there shouldn't be queer pride. Again, please, let's not go there. But there's a problem with the discourse and the way that we're setting up the priorities. This is why when queer Muslims come and say to me, well, how do we deal with queerphobia within our community? Sorry, I digressed a little bit. I'm sorry, I have that habit. What do I say? If you start there, all you're going to get from the Muslim community, from the MSA and so on and so forth, is reactionary politics. They're going to just give you the middle finger and tell you, the hell with that. You're not Muslim, you're not this, you're not that. Start with the big stuff. It's the nation state and capitalism that structures this. All this discourse of gender. It's what's cis heteropatriarchal, it is what is sexist, it is what is misogynist in a day and age in which we're all militarized because we're all watching one another. Constantly. Praying. And we're always engaged in gossip, in namima. The left is brilliant, has mastered the art of destroying each other. Marxists versus anarchists versus queers versus feminists versus this versus that. The right, when it comes down to it, they hold the line. They may have disagreements, and even in public, but they hold the line. What? Republicans didn't disagree with Trump, Mitt Romney or otherwise, but when it comes to holding the line, they hold the line. And that's how they're able to achieve what they want to achieve. We have no vision, we have no strategy. And we're unable to even distinguish between what is strategy and what is tactic at any given moment, which is a major crisis. Everybody should be reading Sun Tzu's The Art of War. There's a reason that book was forbidden from soldiers. Only generals had access to it, because if they read it, the soldiers would revolt. We are in a state of war. War! And we need to contend with that. Thanks.
Okay, so we've got 2 more questions on Stack, and there's lots of other hands in the room, and we're at an hour. So yeah, I've got 1 question here and another question there in the corner. What are we doing about the time and more questions? Can I throw that out? Can we accept a few more questions? Are people comfortable to stay another 20? How many more minutes, max? 15 more minutes max. Okay, great. And there's questions in the back. Okay, so what I'm going to do... sorry, Mohamed. So I've got one question here, the second question there, and then I'm going to take... I saw this... I'm sorry, I saw the person behind you put up their hand like 20 minutes ago, so I'm going to take them, if that's okay. And I'm going to... I also saw you 10 minutes ago, but you... Okay. 2. 1, 2... And 3 also has been, your hand has been up for a while. This is just who I'm seeing in the order I'm seeing it. I'll take 4, but we mightn't have time for it. So, okay, we're gonna go 1, 2, and then another 4 questions. My God. And maybe we can try to do this together. It's because we've got 15 minutes. Yeah, gathering all the questions, and then we'll see what we can do, right? That makes sense. Okay, we'll give people a second. Okay, so your question here, I'm going to hand you the mic because you're close enough.
Thank you for your revolutionary speech. I really like it. I would like to just point something actually got my attention here. You said something about the resistance. You said something about the resistance, and you said something also about the liberation. And I really like this point. I would like to ask if okay. I would like to. Sorry, my voice is not the same.
I can repeat the question when he's done with it. So
when we get the mic.
With this point, I want to remind you that we are here in Berlin to 2024 after more than 1 year of genocide.
Yeah.
And I start to feel like we are actually practicing or witnessing a genocide online, and also practicing a reflection of a reflection of a reflection, which is happening in Gaza. And actually what happened is the circumstances of the 7th of October that the regime of Bashar al-Assad fell down, which is actually interesting to call it a circumstance. My question is simply that I wanted maybe you to point exactly the difference between the tactic and the strategies of the left movement, if we can say in our time. Thank you.
Can we repeat that
Yes,
and then go on to the next question?
So I'm going to repeat the question real quick. The question
It's going to be hard.
for our sibling, from our sibling, was, you know, given the distinction between resistance and liberation, the question of Syria and Bashar al-Assad, specifically in that context, and the question of tactics and strategy, and how does that work in the context of a place like Syria? So that was the question. I will take other questions, and then, because I would really love for as many people to ask as possible, and I'll try and do my utmost, inshallah. And what I can't answer here, I'm more than happy, like, transitioning outside and spending as much time with you all as possible. It's the least that I can.
So my question's kind of like a little bit two-faced, which is sorry. One is particular. You said that you want to reject the terminology of identity politics, but also you use the term Turtle Island, which I find interesting in that sense because, you know, it's a Lenape term and it's not universal to all of indigenous rights, but it forms a unifying factor. What then do you think is the distinction between the use of, is it co-optation, like the capacity to be co-opted? Is that why you would reject BIPOC, but utilize Turtle Island? And then on the more broad question about indigeneity, and what is then the value of indigeneity in our language of liberation? Because, like, I mean, as a Black West African, you know, the concept of indigeneity is like more not as relevant to our resistance to white supremacy, but also I grew up in Ireland, where they are indigenous people, but also both them, the indigenous people, and the colonizers are white. And how, yeah, just what do you think of the intersections of the concept of indigeneity with that?
Thank you. Wow.
Okay, now there's one back there, and we're going to see if we can get you. Okay.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay, let's see if we can.
So I'm reading the book Sex and the Sedative by Shireen Al-Faqi, and she talks about how there are kind of two questions, and she talks about how, like, Islamism, like, or Islam, starts becoming more and more how do you say it, eng, like yeah, like becomes more narrow after Bonaparte sets foot on the Arabic world, to say, and how this defeat, because they were able to defeat the Crusaders, and they were so cocky, and they're like, of course we'll win against Bonaparte, that this first defeat marks the beginning of Islam becoming more tight regarding sex, regarding everything. So my question is, what are can we differentiate between colonialist changes on Islam and reactionary changes from Muslims towards the West because it's seen as a threat? And if yes, where would you draw the line? I have this first question, and the second is that you were talking also about, oh yeah, capitalism, Marxism, it's also religion, but I just have this one point that I can't figure out. And when we talk about war, and you talked about, we should all read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, it's very clear there is no war without an economic gain. It's not just a Marxist thing, it's everywhere. So where does religion fall on that? Because if we are talking about anarchist religion, or for example, Latino American people also see Jesus as a revolutionary and used him in the fight against the colonials because Jesus was a different figure for them. So where does the line fall in economics, war, and religion? And how can we not make it shallow? Because if I start a conversation with somebody and they don't want to acknowledge this economics part, talking about religious warfare, how do we make it not seem shallow? Because I feel like I'm missing a point there.
There's a question just there as well. Was it yourself or yourself? You can, yeah, you two can decide between you, but you're the next question. And then there's another one there, yeah, and then we're there, and then that's it. Don't worry, I remember.
I mean, vorsichtig, ein bisschen. La, 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 la.
Hi, thanks a lot for that. What I'm really interested kind of is going on to the earlier question about Islamism and so on, and that how there's often within progressive circles, it goes back kind of to your point about why is the left not united, and I always used to think, okay, the left is poor because it's divided, but then actually as I spent much more time in these circles, I realized no, the left has to be divided because large parts of it are very bad. And you shouldn't unite with them. You shouldn't unite with them. And so, and on this question, for instance, as an example, is how post-Arab Spring, how certain leftist movements dealt with post-Arab Spring revolutions, and they just adopted effectively a lot of the time they adopted far-right discourse against them. Yeah. And especially when it comes to the question of Islamism, which is always interesting to me, is this transactionalist kind of attitude. So when it comes to, let's say, a Western government threatening to overthrow a regime, which is an authoritarian, quote-unquote, Islamic regime, Iran or Afghanistan or whatever, they say, well, who are we to tell these people how they should live? Right. But then when it comes to another example, where it's like actually a democratic revolution, which has an Islamic coloring, let's say, they actually hyper-focus on this and say, why do they have these Islamic colorings? They are fundamentalists, whatever. And so it often comes down to, I think, like obviously it's partly identity politics, which is why I'm really, I think one of the biggest takeaways is your commentary on identity. But it's also, I think, it kind of finds it very easy to throw people under the bus, depending on which geopolitical actor you're trying to fight. If it's America, it's one discourse. If it's Russia, it's another discourse. If it's China, it's another discourse. And I don't know what our responsibilities. You mentioned also responsibilities, which I think was very important. Not just rights, responsibilities for. Let's say it's me. I'm a Muslim. I'm Westernized. I don't really know where I belong in the world. But certain places here in Berlin, for instance, there is obviously, and I should know this living in Berlin, but there's like things I hold sacred, and I'm in desanctized spaces, right? So I'll hear things that say about faith or whatever, or as some Christians that say find it easy to mock Jesus, things that say about Mohamed, and at this point in time, I'm uncomfortable. But then again, I've chosen to be in this space, right? So how do you, I don't know, those are a lot of different thoughts, but how do you deal with these kind of relationships between people who are, in theory, meant to be on the same side?
Can we just pause the questions, and we will get to, because I don't want to lose track, because there are intersecting threads here that I just want to address, even if very briefly, to be able to take a few questions from the back particularly. So I want to go back, and I'm going to link the question of strategy and tactic with the sibling, and then we'll get to the questions with regards to indigeneity, which is really fundamentally important in identity politics, as well as what I perceive as the limits of historical materialism. Okay. I'm going to use the example of Syria. My choices are not going to be, and I've consistently held this line, between a Euro-American Zionist crusading Wahhabi alliance, on the one hand, or a totalitarian Russian, Chinese, or Russian, my choices will not be between, again, a Euro-American crusading Zionist Wahhabi alliance, on the one hand, and a totalitarian Chinese, Russian sort of axis. Russia and China don't give a damn, as has been clearly proven with regards to, for example, Syria. Okay. And they're not, again, there are different levels of capitalism. Russia is capitalism, China is capitalism, even if it preserves an element of a planned economy. Let's not fool ourselves. Let's not play this game. But it's because, again, the left, although there is no left, they're thinking in status terms. there are modes of sovereignty that go beyond the nation state. This is what's getting us in this mess. I'm going to say this again. There are modes of sovereignty that go beyond the nation state. And this is why the left is so afraid. So strategy and tactic. From 2011, and some people might get upset with regards to this. Some people might not, and see what I'm trying to get at. From 2011 till about 2014, right? A little bit after Daesh appeared on the scene. As somebody who participated in Tahrir. As somebody who saw, was in Raba' al-Nahda, the slaughter of the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm no fan of the Muslim Brotherhood. But when the left, feminists, liberals, Naserites, etc. called for the slaughter, the genocide of their own people, this is the mass psychology of fascism. And I was so tired in Tahrir of saying, please, let's talk about the role of spirituality. What's spirituality? Especially by the Marxist-Leninist revolutionary social. What's spirituality? You're crazy. There's no talking to these people. There's no negotiating with these people. So is there nothing redeemable within Muslim discourse? Forget about the Muslim Brotherhood. If you're really revolutionary, you have to understand that the society that you're in, lughat al-khitab in Arabic, the language of the people in which you live amongst. You have to know how to speak to the people that you supposedly want to engage in a vanguardist revolution with or on. It seems that you want to dictate actually to people what to do. And this is why Tahrir was gone. During the 80 days, I saw it coming. And I warned. Nobody wanted to heed because, well, who am I? I'm nobody. And I am nobody. But I was trying to use it as a moment. Anyways, again, it's the same equation. Muslim Brotherhood, Naserites, Sadatists. There was a queer tent in Tahrir. There was a pride march in Tahrir. There were anarchists in Tahrir. The colors of the universe existed in Tahrir. And subhanAllah, from the wisdom that 2013 would come about, and I said it during 2011. What happened in 2013 could have happened in 2011. We could have murdered each other. But it's as if the grace of God said, here, you have an opportunity. Let's see what you're going to do with it. But no, everybody had their idea and everybody wanted a piece of the pie and everybody wanted to be in power. Well, look what we have now. So strategy and tactic from 2011 till about 2015 in relationship to Syria. Until now, let me say it very clearly. Bashar al-Assad is the butcher of Damascus. And I've been calling the huwa Saffah Damashq. There's no question about it. But here is now the conundrum, because we're thinking in status terms. Am I against do I have issues with the regime in Iran? Oh, of course I have bloody issues with the regime of Iran. On a multiplicity, on a myriad of different levels. Authoritarianism, forced hijab, economy, you name it. You name it. But am I going to feed into imperialism insofar as the dividing and conquering of Iran? The same logic insofar as Syria, up until recently. So for a while I said, okay, from 2015 till recently, because nobody can see the future. One can be somewhat prophetic, but one doesn't have an insight into everything. I said, please keep him in power. Not because I like the guy, but because until we have a plan, look at the forces on the ground in Syria. With all due respect, Syrian people have agency. God damn, they have agency. Were they the ones that liberated Damascus? Let's be honest. Or was it Hayat Tahrir Sham? Does it have an agenda? What's its agenda? What's its roots? This becomes the question. This is not about, because I also have an issue with them. Along the lines of Zionism, 500 kilometers. Jabal al-Sheikh has been taken. Not one word with regards to Palestine. They have their interests. And their proxy, with all the respect of Turkey and Euro-America. And we'll see how the game will unfold. They're meeting with the Saudis and the Emiratis and this and that. Not one word with regards to the genocide that is going. And again, we know the history, the roots of Al-Qaeda and so on and so forth. So it's not out of a rejection of Islam or so-called political Islam. It's just like, I don't have a good feeling about this at all. And this is not to say that Iran did not, again, have its interests in Syria or Hezbollah. The moment that for me, till recently, although I lost respect again with regards to Hezbollah, because again, everybody has their values. Hezbollah, okay, mashallah, what you did in Lebanon in 2006. That's why you were established. Then Hezbollah became, although it was hesitant, a part of the state with a political party. Ooh. You were actually a movement of resistance. And it was trying to abstain from that, but its investment became at a certain point towards the state. So the world of the above. Okay. And then you went into Syria under the auspices of fighting Daesh. And Iran, the same thing, and so on and so forth. And of course, the Americans were mobilizing Daesh and Al-Qaeda and so on and so forth, equally at the same time. Now, we're in a situation in Syria. Who entered Damascus? Was it the Syrian people? I'm happy with regards to Zadnaya. I'm happy with regards to the fact that Syrians, as any other people, deserve, but I'm sorry, Syria is not about just Syria. It is about the entire Levant. Are we interested in decolonization or engaging in superficial? I want a Syrian sovereign state. Fuck the state. If you don't recognize that October 7th burst Pandora's box, October 7th was not a question, it was a rejection of mediocrity. It was a rejection of middle compromising positions. Alayya wa ala a'da'i, upon me and my enemy. That's what it was about. All or nothing. We're not playing these half-ass games anymore. So again, what is our compass? What is our busala? I thought Palestine was our busala. She was our compass. That's the impression that I had. But apparently not. Iraq is thinking of its own sovereignty. Syria is thinking of its own. Who's thinking about Palestine? Who's thinking about Turtle Island and the 1492 arc? This is my problem. So yeah, the hell with Bashar. May he rot in hell. That's even an easy thing to say. But at the end of the day, and yes, the Syrian people, but sorry, our fates are intertwined. Are we for an ummah or are we not? You can't have it both ways. Unless you believe that, like Erdogan, like possibly Ahmed al-Shar, like others, I'm going to use the state in order to free the Muslim world. Fantasy, good luck, it's been tried before. So this is my problem with this discourse. Let's move beyond the state as a sovereign whatever. Do all people deserve to live? Yeah, Syrians deserve to live. What, Gazans don't deserve to live too? Let's think of us as a people, as a jama'ah, as a community, as opposed to reifying the individualism. And Syria is filled, as we know, with lots of ethnicities, with lots of racial, ethnic, let alone religious. But everybody's thinking for themselves, sadly. And there are different forces, and anyways, one can go, and I can say other things, but I don't want to upset certain people in the audience because there are certain blatant contradictions. I appreciate Rochofa, and I appreciate the Kurdish movement, but I'm sorry when you're occupying northeastern Syria, and you're siphoning Syrian oil, and you're fighting for Kurdistan, and you're negotiating with Zionists. What are the spiritual, ethical, political commitments here that we're talking about? Who's looking beyond their own selves? This is my issue. This is my issue. You're anarchists. You should know better. Yeah, you've been fucked by everybody. Okay, and there's no purity politics here. We're not unique white snowflakes. Turkey was involved in Armenian genocide. So were the Kurds. There's no purity politics, just as much as Muslims messed up. Everybody has messed up. And if we start from there and think beyond the state, then maybe we'll get something. So the difference between strategy and tactic, that's precisely it. What is the long game? For me, that is the goal. Sure, at a tactical moment, I'll say, okay. Like, what are our priorities in any given space, ethical, political, whatever moment that we are at? So now to go back to, I hope that sort of addresses. So, and I want to give your questions the due respect. Limits of identity politics. Is the fact that there is anti-blackness a reality? Absolutely. Absolutely. And that comes from an understanding of what blackness is. It's hypervisible, it's invisible, you have mixed race people, and so on and so forth. There was a discussion that I was talking with a bunch of compas yesterday that even somebody with a mixed race background that passes as white, it has a claim to a person of color. Of course, you can claim that sort of racial heritage of yours, but the fact is you have to also identify that you pass as white. So to go back to the Turtle Island distinction here with identity politics. Identity politics rest on individual individual claims to rights. Individual claims to rights vis-a-vis a liberal order. Black people want something, indigenous people want something, people of color, Muslims, whatever, want something from the state. Turtle Island, as you noted, yes, while there are different understandings of it, generally the consensus is on a sort of confederate, okay, we'll use this term in order to embody a certain set of principles and relationalities in symbiotic relation, not only to each other as indigenous nations and peoples, but also in relationship to land. Now the question of indigeneity. In the book, I address the fact that indigeneity is not a racial and ethnic construct, although it has been used as such. Indigeneity to me as a Muslim is the fitra. It is the nascency upon which we are born. I always say that, could I have breathed without my mother? Could I have eaten without my mother? Could I have shat without my mother? My mother always says, don't forget I shut you out, when she's upset at me. But that's the point. My entire existence was mediated vis-a-vis my mother. I could not have survived without that umbilical cord. But then comes the moment of severance. Now you're dressed in blue or pink, male or female, and you're left as an individual into the wilderness of the world and turned into a monster. So this is what becomes key. Indigeneity is about connecting with the initial nascent desire that a child would have to connect with their Mother Earth, literally and metaphorically. Because even indigenous people have been disconnected from the land. Again, we're talking about the defeat of capitalism. Most of people of color live in the urban metropolis. We don't even know how to grow our own food to feed ourselves, let alone our own families. But who owns the land in a place like the US, the Midwest, etc.? It's white people. They're armed to the teeth with stamp decrees, and they're the ones that feed the metropolis. So where's the land in all this? With regards to Sex and the Citadel, great book. I think I'm cited within it. Yes, Napoleon is an important marker, but I would go back and say with every recurrent violent encounter with the Crusades, again, and we are responsible as Muslims for this, we engage in reactionary politics in response back. Let me take a recent or relatively recent example in modernity. Algeria. Were women part of the FLN and resistance of the colonizers, the French? Yes, of course they were. But the moment that Algeria won its supposed independence, what happened? Oh, you go back home. You wash dishes. You wait for me till I get home and then you rub my feet. You wear the hijab, etc., etc. And it's part of what? A certain psyche where it's just like, I need to purify myself for all the impurities that the white man has brought, without reflecting on my own past. Again, reactionary. Without going back, okay, let's go back and see, well, did the women not engage in battles with the Prophet? Did the Prophet not clean, sew, cook, yudaib his wives, play with his wives? Of course, he did all that. But this is the image. ISIS, it takes on a particular image. Oh, the long hair, the beard, different representation, because we're trying to emulate the Prophet. Yeah, in superficial bullshit. As opposed to the commitments, the responsibilities that come about with that. Right? Al-Qaeda takes a different manifestation. You take what you take and you leave what you want to leave. Quickly on the economic question, historical materialism cannot address everything. The economy is important, but it is inseparable from politics. And that is inseparable from spirituality, in my opinion. It is a fusion between both because of what I refer to insofar as 1492, that linked these three things together, simultaneously. So, and again, we could sit down and talk maybe just because we want to take a few more questions. So I hope that just addressed the four or so questions that were positive.